we've been talking about Jerry Seinfeld and what a tool he is.
Since before I worked here.
For probably a decade.
It's kind of an open secret, right? That he's a bit of an a-hole.
Well, I'm not, I don't care what he is in person, although, yeah, that's true. But really, more relevantly, I also love too the how Israel supporter is. I got offered a role on Seinfeld, but they were shooting on Yom Kippur, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. And I remember I ran into the casting director. She was in a car. I was in a car. I was leaving some studio, and she pulls up and she's like, "Why aren't you doing this?" And no, it was a guy actually, and he's like, "Why aren't you doing this?" I'm like, I think his name was Mark. Mark, it's Yom Kippur. I happen to know a lot of these people on the show are Jewish. Like, I'm not doing it. It's Yom Kippur. I don't work on Yom Kippur. But put that aside. That's not relevant here. But what Jerry Seinfeld is about to say is such a crock of garbage. It's unbelievable. I couldn't believe this. I saw that he was trending. I'm like, why?
It's not because his wife donated the most amount to the UCLA protesters, pro-Israel protesters that said the N-word at pro-Palestine demonstrators. It's not that. It's this part about him.
Nothing really affects comedy. People always need it. They need it so badly, and they don't get it. It used to be you would go home at the end of the day, most people would go, oh, Cheers is on, oh, MASH is on, oh, Mary Tyler Moore is on, All in the Family's on. You just expected, there'll be some funny stuff we can watch on TV tonight. Well, guess what? Where is it? This is the result of the extreme left.
Okay, pause it. Now, I don't know how they cut this up. But the idea that they're, and we should say, those 5 or 6 shows, he just basically listed all of the sitcoms on at that time. All of them. The idea that there's less number of funny shows. And yes, on network television, I would say the comedy was better back in the day. And the reason is because there were no other options. The competition wasn't as stiff. The industry was still very young. The number of people who had televisions was less. Much of them were highly educated, so you could have highly educated people who were coming from diverse backgrounds go in and write. Now it's just a pipeline from Harvard onto these sitcoms. But the idea that he's comparing, understand, the sitcoms he's talking about were on in the 70s. Which was, incidentally, a very woke time coming out of the 60s. In the early 70s, a very woke time.
All in the Family was considered that right at the time, like actually discussing race on TV.
But this is what this old man, and I'm speaking as an old man, this is what this old man doesn't understand. When he starts mentioning these shows, he's talking about television programs that were on 50 years ago. 50 years ago. Now, I don't know what you think has happened in between those period of time in terms of comedy.
Well,
but go ahead.
Guess what? Where is it? This is the result of the extreme left and PC crap and people worrying so much about offending other people. When you write a script and it goes into 4 or 5 different hands, committees, groups, here's our thought about this joke. Well, that's the end of your comedy.
Okay, pause it. Now, this is fascinating to me because I have written at least maybe 10 scripts for network television. ABC, NBC, CBS, HBO, AMC, Fox. I mean, just about all of the networks at one time or another. And there was never a single time that I did this where you did not hand it over to 4 or 5 people who are executives at the network who would give you notes. And only one or 2 of those shows even got produced. And it makes me really wonder how involved he was in the writing process. Now, I don't know. I will say this too. I do know for a fact that the Seinfeld show was part of, at an era when comedians were getting holding deals. I got a couple of those holding deals. They were massive, massive. They don't do anything like this anymore for like basically no names or even, like whatever it is. It's not even close. But I made tons of money, huge money on holding deals. And he was he had a holding deal. This is what I remember about how Seinfeld was developed. And they did the show because they wanted to have him around for maybe to fill in on the Tonight Show, I think it was. Because they were going through all this stuff with Carson and with Leno, and they wanted to have him under wraps. And so this show, Seinfeld, was basically a way to keep him in the fold. And they put it up, and it was underperforming and this and that, but they just didn't worry about it. So maybe Seinfeld did not get the normal amount of scrutiny that most sitcoms got then and since. I mean, I in the early 90s, mid 90s, I did sitcoms. I saw what happened with those things. They would give it to the network and we would have to change stuff. They'd give it to the studio. We'd have to change stuff. What he's talking about is complete fiction. Yeah. The idea that these committees have been set up for PC purposes. Now, he may think that the people who look at these things, the executives and the audience, has become more PC, which means their tastes have changed.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Like, this is just the redo of him complaining about his gay king joke that wasn't funny to people anymore. But I got news for you. Go watch some of the best comedians in the world and go and tell me whether those jokes are relevant anymore. Yeah. They're not. Comedy has very little staying power.
Sam, in the 80s, were there comedians or performers upset because they couldn't jump Jim Crow anymore?
Exactly. Yeah. I can't do my step and fetch it anymore. People don't seem to funny. And it's like, oh, you shouldn't do that anymore.
Man. I mean, maybe he could tune into the show that he was just on, Curb Your Enthusiasm, to see what his writing partner, who got a blank check from HBO to do much funnier stuff than he'd been doing. I'm sorry, I haven't seen the B movie, since Seinfeld went off the air, or his other colleague and coworker, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who Veep did not hold back in some of the kind of offensive jokes, or It's Always Sunny, or 30 Rock, or any of these other awesome shows that have come out since then. But if he wants a more current perspective, he could always just go to the local high school and pick up a girl there again and maybe ask her opinion.
I mean, all of that stuff, honestly, is largely irrelevant in my mind. I think it's probably more a function of like, he's just...
Well, it's relevant to him.
Mad. He's just mad that he's irrelevant.
Yeah.
That nobody... that's what this is about. And he's making shit up. It's just comedy was never particularly interesting. It wasn't. Was the show good? It was okay. Even if you think it was great, go listen to some of his stand-up. Why don't you want to hear more about airline food?
No, the edgy stuff came from Larry. It was Larry.
There wasn't a lot of competition.
It's boring.
It was Larry.
Seinfeld's stand-up was boring. Boring. Go ahead.
Groups, here's our thought about this joke. Well, that's the end of your comedy. They move the gates, like in skiing. Yeah. Culture, the gates are moving. Your job is to be agile and clever enough that wherever they put the gates, I'm going to make the gate. Nothing really...
Like, I don't like. This is the thing he doesn't understand. Culture is moving, and guess what, dude? You know, you left your skis in the lodge.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Sorry, your rolls is getting stopped at the gate.
It's unbelievable. It really is amazing to me. And what's really amazing to me is like, and I guess they got to do this because he probably has such a fragile ego. But and Remnick's there, and he's a bright guy, but like, somebody push back on the absolute lunacy and ridiculousness of this whiny guy. Just take your millions. If you can't do a show that people like you say, like Larry David has, or like
Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Or Tina
If you can't
Fey.
seem to write one that people like, then just wrap it up, buddy, and go home. Stop complaining. Stop complaining.
He really has no reason to. He's got hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, ego's pretty big.
Imagine you had an infinite budget and you still couldn't be funny anymore.
You still can't
Exactly.
be- Yeah,
Be hell
right.
on earth.
Right.
Exactly. And he says, it doesn't affect me or Larry David anymore. Well, then how come, where's
Show it.
your show?
And Larry seems a lot less bitter than you, buddy.
Eddie Munster. I saw Seinfeld stand up a few years ago and was surprised by how recycled his jokes were. I knew the punchline to half his material. Yeah, it's not surprising at all. Ostentatious. MASH was anti-war and far left. The butt of every joke was a ferret-faced John Birch Society. Get us out of the Union, philandering American patriot, and Frank Burns. All in the Family. The Jeffersons.
Sanford and Son.
Sanford and Son. Well, All in the Family and Jeffersons in
Right,
particular
the Norman Lear.
were Norman Lear shows. They were extremely far left for that era. Extremely. And at that time, the setup, at least, very much for All in the Family, was look how anachronistic Carol O'Connor's, Archie Bunker is. But we got to put a couple of people in there to complain about him. Meathead and Archie's daughter. I can't remember her character's name. Sally Struthers. I mean, and that was 60 years ago. The idea that there would be no progress and like we wouldn't get past that as a satire, we're still going to recycle that? He doesn't, when he watches it, he doesn't get it because it used to be that TV was literally all about guys like he and I. And now when he turns it on, he's like, well, what is this? I don't get this. That's his problem. God. Jesus. I find it so enraging. And back when I was like doing comedy, like when we were at doing cross comedy, I mean, we couldn't have been more disdainful of how boring Jerry Seinfeld was. At a time like where it was just like had nothing to do with anything other than like, God, man, fucking wants to deal with that.
Right.
God. Gloria, thank you, was the name of Meathead's girlfriend, or Archie Bunker's daughter.